Okay, I think that I can start to present
Hrvoje
Njiric. So, I met Hrvoje Njiric too many years ago. Right now, I think that it is more than 20 years ago. And he was invited by probably Pierre-Alain Crozet in Brescia for a workshop.
That's right, in Brescia,
In Brescia, and then I meet him again in Ferrara for another workshop. I invited him in Trieste when I was teaching there. And always it was a very interesting experience because Hrvoje is a rare case in which there is both talent and intelligence. So he's very smart, a smart thinker, and a super smart architect. He comes from my generation. We are almost 60. I'm 60, but he's almost 60. We are very young architects, and we were young architects of the Europan generation. A generation who, in a way, in a way changed the architectural panorama, and he with his former wife Elena participate in 2 or maybe 3 Europan competitions that I remember.
4.
Or Glasgow, 4. For Glasgow and Den Bosch, I remember those 2.
And in Germany, Turin.
Okay. Yeah. So those projects were very smart with fantastic diagrams and fantastic outcomes. So I use always Hrvoje's projects in my design studios. Always with very not so good outcomes because his projects are simple but not simple to copy because it is a difficult simplicity in a way. So I would like to teach my student to get the same ability, but it is very difficult. So it is easier to start from a not so good project, but for instance, by a Dutch firm. They are very straightforward. It is possible to get them better. But with the Hrvoje Njiric project, it is a little bit more difficult. So he taught in many universities. He's a smart architect. He's now a full professor in Split, in Croatia, but he teaches abroad very often. So I think that it is time to give him the word and let him to start the lecture. Okay, thanks, Hrvoje. Thanks to the people. I now switch off the mic and let's go.
Okay, thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Thank you for nice words that you said to me, Giovanni. So I hope I will be able to show some of these things in the lecture. Is everybody seeing the screen, or shall I do it again? I think I should.
Yeah, you should do it again.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. Why doesn't it work? Are you seeing anything or not?
Yes, it's working.
It's working.
Yep.
Okay, so you see this image. Okay, so this is just a little joke for the beginning, but I'm also amazed by the fact that we can communicate in this new altered, changed world that we are participating in. However, some procedures will be still viable in the times to come. So I wanted to show you as much as I can in this hour of the presentation, and then to give you half an hour for the questions. So to make things simpler, I divided some of the older projects by the means of scale, and then I will show you some new work that we have been dealing with in the last couple of years. So first about the scale. As you can see that we can be very misguided by the reading of the scale that surrounds us. And for the architects, I think it's very important to be aware of this scale and to take it as a kind of a very important architectural tool. These are some work by some German artists who wanted to argument this thesis that we should be well aware of the scale and that we shouldn't be misguided by the level of elaboration or the detailing. Scale, which also participates in a public domain. This is the commercial for Unicredito Bank, called Zagreb Bank in Croatia, which gives us a clue how to participate with this small scale environment of a living room within the public domain. Especially today, it becomes very actual because actually our living room becomes a part of the public domain, that you are now all sitting in your rooms and actually participating in this public debate that we are conducting today. So this idea of small and big, public and private, somehow comes together by the virtue of electronic means. So, and this small scale intervention in the city also seemed to attract our attention, and that we as architects should be well aware that we can also deal with this small scale. There are some excerpts from some websites which I find very attractive in terms of steering up and awakening our attention as architects to the different levels of perception and to different scales and measures. So they are not necessarily connected with only with Japanese culture, but also with some other surroundings where this public and private comes together, and also idea of different programs that could be somehow combined, combining the private and the public, and so on and so on. There are a lot of images. I particularly like this one about using the billboard for some other purposes. Someone might call it hybrid or things like that, or many functions being brought together, like in this image by Radiohead, or this idea of communicating within a very small private domain, but somehow making it as a lively space. The idea of the space between the objects. It's also very important to be aware of the scale of the areas in between. Actually, this image that I'm also very fond of shows us that maybe not the buildings are not always that important as the space in between them. This is a view of Zagreb from the nearby mountain, which somehow gives this idea of the blurred appearance of the city, where we as architects have to make it more articulate. This is the main square in Zagreb. Allow me a few introductory images to give you an idea where I'm coming from. The city of Zagreb actually on its main square shows the variety of styles, starting from Art Nouveau and historic styles up to the 60s skyscrapers that you see in the middle. A collection of the houses made by architects such as Peter Behrens, which is behind the photographer now, or Marcello Piacentini, which is on the right, you don't see it now. Zagreb was also a kind of a setting for a film, in this particular case for Orson Welles, his famous film movie, The Trial, which was shot almost exclusively the exteriors in this modernist street where we have our own versions of Unité d'Habitation made by the architects from Croatia. And also this lecture will also give you an idea what architectural interpretation of modernity is. This is the entrance to the municipality of Zagreb, where you can see this idea of the scale. You can see this smoker using this very tiny corner to be protected from the rain and wind and to be able to enjoy her cigarette. Also, this idea of a scale, which also somehow demands from us as architects a special sensitivity, or this idea that the guy uses the foyer of a bank as a sleeping premise. So these are all things that somehow deserve our attention. This is the place where I'm teaching, but 20 centuries ago, the city of Split, the Diocletian Palace, as it was more or less in the past, and as it is today, this transformation from the palace of one to the city of many, this lively capacity of the structure to be invaded by some other programs. It's very important for us, and the way how certain functions can be done in a very impromptu manner. This idea, which also in this time of Corona has a special validity by keeping the distance, right? The guy comes with the boat, sells his goods, and the other takes it and goes back home. So we should also let ourselves be a bit more attentive to these distances between the people. This idea of using multi-purpose means or devices to achieve different goals. This table tennis table can be used for, as you can see, other purposes, not to forget this little dog enjoying the shadow below it. That the public space can really not necessarily be very demanding. It can be improvised as it is in this scale, is this staircase in the city of Dubrovnik. So Dalmatia is a kind of a compendium of things that we can learn from. And I will try to give you a few clues how this functions in our project. So different scales and various programs. First, the small ones. This was a project for a tiny little house for a famous Croatian writer in a hinterland of Dalmatia, where this is a kind of a archetypal typology that we can encounter there. A lot of stone, and you can see this wall. I hope you see my cursor. So this is actually the site, and we entouraged the site with a stone wall and proposed a house which can be done in one line. You see one line of the stone wall coming here, 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 and also creating ambiguous spaces, those who are facing outwards, those who are facing inwards, and so on, all capped with a roof. So this is the idea of his writing room and some other purposes that you can enjoy by the idea, but doing just one line, just one theme. This is, as I said, a very simple project, but a certain richness comes from this simplicity and how you articulate it in terms of materiality. So this is the idea of this house. I hope you can see it pretty well in the model now, and with some ideas how the roof might look like. Another example is a little satellite town nearby Zagreb for a little commercial center. Here it was important also to go into this very particular scale of this 19th century city. So we were asked to do this little commercial center, and this is the way how we reacted to that. With these 3 volumes, somehow interpreting the nearby tissue and forming a kind of a public platform for different gatherings in between. So this is how this structure looks like. Then a project for a church in Rijeka, Fiume. We wanted to also deal with things called everydayness. And this is an image of a church that was made after the Homeland War that we have in 1995. This is one of the nicest examples that we have. I think this is a very important reading for the students to recognize the beauty of this structure, because it's all made prefab, all made with auxiliary means. but the heraldic is there, the cross is there, you have the main nave, you have the side naves made of containers, of course. Everything is reduced to this Christian poverty, which is prophesied. And you have the basilical lighting, if you want, right? So the whole vocabulary is there. It's very simple, it's very straightforward. It's not pretending to be something which is not. So by knowing this, we entered the competition for a new cultural center, like a remodeling of the existing house in Fiume. And this is the project for a new church, somehow forming a kind of ensemble with a public space in between and the passage and so on and so on. So this is how we articulate this very simple archetypal volume in a kind of a interplay with this cultural center as a very simple, straightforward structure. It was important that we needed to include the spaces for education of young people within these premises, which are relatively small scale. So we included it on a balcony. You can see this balcony here, which somehow cantilevers the whole interior of the church, which was somehow a shock for the priest. He wasn't really expecting that, and it produces a kind of a dynamic space in interior. So this is the idea of having a archetypal volume and then remodeling it according to the needs, also forming certain areas that have different scale from the ground scale of the whole house, or this balcony for the singers and so on. So these are some images of the interior. Some more drawings. You can see these two forms invading the archetypal rectangle of the church, and with this straightforward, very simple detailing of the house. So this is the idea of this Sunday morning where everybody comes. Of course, nowadays you cannot see it like this. It was a big debate in Croatia because some of the priests for the Easter opened the churches and didn't want to listen to the bishop or the pope or the politics. They just opened the churches and said who wants to come should come. So this was like a kind of a big polemic whether they are doing it right or should they somehow be loyal to what everyone else is doing with this social distancing. But we'll see how this debate is going to end. Anyway, these images will probably be possible sometimes in the future. Little intervention, also a small one in Zagreb. Here is the Academy of Fine Arts, and they wanted to make a little gallery here. So the most of the competitors, it was a nice competition where we were told that Peter Zumthor and some Spanish architects, let me remember his name. I cannot remember at the moment. Anyway, it was a competition with good jurors, and we did a lot of efforts to make it nice. However, the end of the competition is not so clear how it ended. Zumthor didn't even appear, so it was somehow left for some local architects to decide. So this is the gap, right? So the most immediate reaction would be close the gap, right? So, but then as architects, we should somehow not forget, and I think it's also very important that I keep telling to my students always that our foremost duty is towards the public space. So if this is the main street in Zagreb, right? So we actually studied a number of such gaps along the main street and said, okay, this is a chance to make another little public space and to move the house towards the internal part of the block and to make the passage which is necessary for the vehicles and for the pedestrians. So to make this articulation as a public space, which also gives us a variety of possibilities, which you will see soon. So this is, as you can see, a very tiny house with some sort of a ceremonial staircase, the fire staircase, administration. and you have this open air gallery here, and all the gallery happens downwards and upwards. So you will see it in a moment. So this is the appearance of the house towards the street, or more like this. As you can see, it's entirely like a kind of monolithic volume, like Stanley Kubrick one, for example, but made out of brick, which goes from dark into light or dissolves in the air. I'll tell you something about it just now. So this is the section. We made a pretty big 1:50 scale model for that. So these are the lower galleries. You can see the gallery from this public space, and the other galleries go on across the floors. So this is this outward part of the gallery, which somehow mediates the arts towards the public domain, which is also a very important issue in arts today. So we made a very simple, as Giovanni was saying, a very simple but somewhat complex gesture by making this mute brick wall here, just with a little notion of the entrance here, and with this sort of sunken patio with some sculptures, like an invitation towards the inner inside volumes, and also giving the light into the sunken galleries. So this is about this wall, the simplicity or the beauty of this brick wall that we wanted to manipulate with this calcium substance, which goes out of the brick. So we studied some chemicals to get into this sort of image from 0 to 100. And we manipulate with different ingredients, the brick, to have it as it is in this red-orange tone, or to stimulate or to use less sealant to make it more with this white calcium coming out of the brick. So this is the idea of having this gradient by manipulating this very material of the facade. So this is a kind of a, I would call it parallel story to the main one related to the public space and articulation of the exhibition space. This is the view from the block towards the outside, towards the street. And this is another image how this entrance might eventually look like. Okay, another small project, a pavilion for the vicinity of the main square in Zagreb. It was a pavilion for our Triennale in 2009. So we call it CG Pavilion 09. So this is the position. This is the main square that I have already shown you. And this is the little meadow where we put this pavilion. This is the position, just looking over to the main square. On the other hand side, towards the cathedral, these are some models. This is all based on the film by Buster Keaton, 2 weeks, about this monstrous house that happens, where the jealous ex-lover doesn't want this couple to have their new house, but he changes the number of the boxes before the assembly and makes this monster in the end. So the question is, who changes the numbers on the boxes in Croatian architecture? What is the future of Croatian architecture at all? So by answering these questions, we decided to make it out of two most despised or hated materials, that is rendered extruded polystyrene and plastic windows. So this is the polystyrene field. This is the plastic windows. We'll say we'll make the house with these two materials only, and make it a bit that no of the windows are alike, and that we have this sort of shaky atmosphere. It is like a kind of a little tempietto. Bramante comes in mind when you say that, right? So these are some working drawings. It's Big Brother behind the cathedral, which was this part fell off in the earthquake a month ago. So they had to cut the other one. I don't know why, but they cut the other one with an explosion here. So we have it up to here at the moment, but this is all kind of historicist style, which is not really genuine. So maybe it would be better if they cut it up to this point, but this is another story. So this is the assembly process by steel construction and wrapping it in these plastic windows and this XPS material. towards the final one. You see its view from the main square. It was a temporary pavilion. It's also very important device and I would say strategy in architecture that houses should have certain duration. This number T, time, is very important. I think that students should take a lot of attention to that point, that our houses, some of them have a very limited duration, in that particular case for 3 months, and in some cases they are meant to last forever. If we take Adolf Loos, as he's saying that only tombs and monuments are meant to last forever and everything else, he says, has an expiry date, then we should somehow see it in that light. Some more images of this house sitting peacefully in the meadow and also housing a lot of public and artist events in these 3 months. So this is, and the movie by Buster Keaton was also shown in this cylinder, which is inserted into the central part of the building. This kind of a pulpit, which has this sacral appearance, or this centrality of church-like spaces, of course, quite intentionally done like that, right? So there are some nice images about this abstract volume that has this shadow and light in the height. And it was a kind of, I would say, pretty successful public event in this 2009. Medium scale, we have to hurry up. This is our campus in Split, where this is where I teach. This is the Faculty of Architecture and Civil Engineering, and this is the other part of the campus with this 1970 idea of a new Split, a new Cardor and Decumanus, and following the Roman centuriation. This diagonal part is going all the way here in planning. So our site for the new law faculty was supposed to be here. It's still in negotiation, still in the process. The idea that we should somehow articulate the borders with some additional programs. And this is the position of the house. So another lesson for the students would be, when you design a house, try to look a bit beyond the limits of the site. So make yourself some local border conditions clear before you enter the very program of your task. This is the idea. The house with 3 courts, the idea of having it secluded, like, let's say, a version of Terrania-like space with shifts and modifications of this internal courtyards with 3 pavilions. Some references for that. I don't want to go into the detail now. Some images of that central staircase and this staircase, which is very important because the site is sloping. So our foyer happens on 3 levels, 1, 2, 3. It's a stepped foyer, and you can see it here. So within the house, with this public domain carved into the house, we saw this height difference. So this is the idea of introducing the public space into it and slowly, gradually progressing to this part and connections to the next faculty, and so on and so on. There are some auditoria cantilevered into this free space of a courtyard. You will see it. There are some plans. There are some arches, which are very popular in Croatian culture. Every tourist worker wants to attract Italian guests, maybe not Italian guests, but someone else who is a bit more keen on seeing the arches. You have a lot of them anyway. So arches happen everywhere, and it's a part of a popular culture. So we thought, let's deal with these arches. Let's do something with them. So first of all, we made them double height, and we slightly deformed them, and we filled them with different fillings. So the lesson that we take is taken from the Diocletian Palace again, where you can see the Roman arches, 20 centuries old, and you see these modern interventions, how this wall was actually remodeled, but still remaining with these powerful arches as a kind of a framework which gives a certain freedom in design. Even those AC units somehow do not compromise the the integrity of the whole structure. So this was the idea, and this is the most important diagram. This is something that Giovanni was talking about as part of making the ideas as clear as possible. So this is the framework, these are the infills, and you put them in and you make a house. And after some time you can close this one and open this one. So the structure and the main articulation remains the same, but according to the very needs of the faculty, you can change the insides as you like. We also use some popular elements to make these very simple boxes. You can call it eventually house within the house. You can learn something about it later on within this internal volume. And this is how the house was actually proposed to look from the outside, somehow revealing parts of this internal courtyards with some Mediterranean plants inside. Okay, another mid-level building is another faculty for chemistry and pharmaceutics in city of Zagreb, next to the main cemetery, in a botanical garden. So it was already a second competition for this faculty. The first one we came third. In this one we came second. So we are hoping to get the third chance to finally win this competition, because in the previous rounds the buildings were not done. Anyway, so we somehow thought that it is important to somehow include this botanical garden into the house. So actually what we wanted to do is to frame the landscape with very subtle means. We also asked the help of people like Paul Klee, who says building the castle in the forest. So the importance of modern and contemporary art for us as architects is very important. I keep telling it to my students, but none of them understands me. I hope that maybe you as Italians or people studying in Italy might eventually listen to that and try to take inspiration more from art and not only from the architects, especially not from the current ones. So try to dig a bit deeper, try to see the different legacy of art in different cultures, and try to make a certain scenario for yourself. This would be my message for that. So this is the idea of this castle in the forest that we make here. And we want to make it as a kind of an artificial forest. We call it mushroom columns, which are actually the main structure, referencing to Frank Lloyd Wright or Carvajal in Spain, or some other guys like Foster in Spain again, trying to use this to position our columns. But the columns are not put in a raster, in a grid. They are somehow freely formed, like, for example, Plečnik would do. Maybe for some of you, Plečnik is not the known name, so put it into your browsers later on. Plecnik, Slovenian architect Plečnik, who tells us that we should be a bit more free with positioning our structure, as well as he does in a lot of his churches. Okay, so this is the idea that these columns should also have a lot of ingredients, a lot of techniques, and don't want to go into detail, but they are fully installed with all those things. They're not only the structural elements for the main structure, but also for a lot of different things to make the house sustainable. This is the idea. This is an image from a Winterthur School of Architecture, where this industrial space with these implants forms a fantastic working environment for the students. One of the best next to the Harvard one that I saw in my visits across the world. They made it really great. So the idea is again about the house within the house. So we put these are the images in the construction. So they put this table. They construct the house within these former industrial space. So we do the same by inserting these volumes into the structure of mushroom columns, and the rest is made with glass. So you see the bit more articulated section with these inserts or implants in the main structure, and the roof and the facade is then double and also with a lot of plants to make a kind of a sustainable double filter towards the outside and to make it more blending with the nature and in the same time working as a sun protection and so on. So this is the idea of these volumes within the main structure. And the idea of having this slope of the existing meadow inserted into the house. So the floor is gradually going up or falling down. So when you enter the building, you see, when you see these columns and this sloping floor, you should somehow have this feeling of walking through the somewhat altered nature, but still the nature or the woods. So these are some of the images of the inside, the very simple ones. These are the perspectives that we like in our studio. At the end, I will show you some more commercial ones that we have to do for some competitions, but my message for the students would be make such drawings. For the architects, they will do. We don't need to wrap it with all possible materials and shadows to give you an idea what the space looks like. I know that for the competitions and maybe for some of your teachers, it's better to do the real rendering, but try to stay away from it if you can. So some more drawings of this, of the structure, which is, I think, pretty clear, and how it sits in the landscape with this sort of descending staircase, always related to the very outside of the building, and so on. Of course, we have some, this is one of the examples that I'm going to show you with so-called Cfd analysis, where we somehow try to control the flows of the heat and other media within the house, where these mushrooms are also performing as such elements, giving a kind of a good temperature in the summer or in the winter. I cannot go into detail with that now. This is the final image of this. This is something that we did more than 10 years ago for a housing settlement. This was one of the questions as far as I can remember from Tommaso, what we do. So this is a kind of a commercial building that is done in the green outskirts of the city of Zagreb, and we wanted to oppose to that by saying no to this and yes to this sort of a landscaped stripes or ribbons, if you want. So by doing this, we did a little settlement in the part of Gračani. The last project that I will show you is a little medical clinic here, a bit more to the north. But this is where we made this little settlement. By using the topography, by making these very narrow bands, which somehow gives a special a neighborhood towards the people from the houses. So this is how is it in section or in the model or combination of flats or the public space in between with the kindergarten, with the children playground here. And this is how it looks in reality. We have the bigger floors for the night, for the daytime, and smaller for the nighttime. These are the ambience that you get, the neighborhoods, the very simple fencing, and I would say very straightforward design with very cheap rendered materials, stucco, and with emphasis of these terraces. So the flats have either a terrace or a garden. This is before the plants grew a bit stronger because they were meant to divide the view from the terrace to the garden. And so on and so on. We have to speed up a bit if you want to show, if you want to see everything. Another example for the gypsies. This is the Gypsy Settlement, a very, I would say, illegal one, almost entirely made without the building permit. So they wanted, the municipality of Zagreb wanted to have a kind of a cultural center for the gypsies with the police station, with a gym, with the medical center and so on. So this is how the gypsies construct. So when the competition was launched, it was an empty site, but gypsies as they are invaded the site in between with their houses, and these are the limits of the site. So what can we do then? We wanted to make an amnesty for this building, so we wanted to insert the center in between these houses, right? And by doing that, we had to demolish some of them, but the rest remained there. So we inserted the programs within the structure, first as bands, which were proven to be too thin, and then we articulated a bit more with the real houses, and also again with emphasis of the public space in between them. So this is how it looks in the plan or in the model. You see this generous public space, which will be then also or elaborated as you should. This is kind of an empty stage for the gypsies, for their festivities and for their way of living. But know that the building are very simple industrial shacks made with a very simple idea. And again, the emphasis is on the public space and on this procedure of making illegal, legal living next to each other. Let me just show you this image again. Because this wall delineates but still connects the existing illegal houses with the public space. So this is maybe the most important images which combine these two reality into one. Design is not so important, so I hope that your teachers are also telling you that the strategic thinking is much more important than articulating house to the last bolt or the screw. So this is about the people who stand in the front row. This is another housing settlement that we did where the earthquake struck the strongest. The earthquake was here, 3 kilometers below this point. So it was the most struck part of Zagreb. And we had this site with these two little water flows here. And here were also envisaged these buildings like blocks that we manipulated the standard typology towards the semi-detached housing. Then we manipulated them again to arrive to something that we call rural mat. Mat in terms of this Smithson's legacy of having these very compact, clearly formed flat structures. And we call it collective housing, individual housing in the group. So it has the quality of individual house. So this is the process of manipulation of this archetypal form towards this, what we call rural mat. Rural, because it's in the rural setting in the outskirts of Zagreb. So this is one of these mats. And this is how they sit on the site. This is lower than that side. So everyone has either a garden or a terrace or this front garden as its own enlargement of the living space with some barbecue elements on here. So this is the structure. We also designed the barbecue for them. Some more images, and these are the renderings that we are not very fond of, but we have to make it for the selling catalogs. And what was very important for us was the scale of this little village settlement, which came part of the sprawl of Zagreb, with these small scale elements that are inserted along something that we call semi-public space in between. So these are some images of the buildings, not always having a reference point of a church in the center of the settlement with these carports, where we took half of the cars away from this public space. This sort of space in between where people can gather and meet. And some images of the elevation. Okay, now we go to the bigger scale projects. The first one is campus in Zadar, the former military site here. This is the historic core of the Zadar. And we had to remodel this into something else. So we did a master plan, taking these stripes from the 50s with these sort of familiar houses from the 30s. And we combined them together into this site. Again, public space as a kind of a spine, the faculties, the little villas for the postgraduates and professors, and all inclined programs, 1, 2, 3, 4 are the public programs. Concentrating on this one, which is a new university library, because the competition was called for the library and the urban planning. So I will show you some details of the library, the idea that the library can become a hotel or a market or a mall, the idea of Aldo Rossi, Architettura Autonoma, where in the same frame you can think of different functions within the time. So we said the house can be everything. Let's design a sequence of nice spaces with some courtyards, and they might eventually be a library in a certain point, and later on the city can assign them to some other programs. The idea of a very highly installed perimeter, the in-between space with 3 courtyards, and a kind of a progressing ramp, which makes this kind of a loop within the building. This is the building which we wanted to design as a timeless building and a scaleless. You cannot tell the scale of this building because the human figure is that tall. We wanted to make something that is somehow escaping the scale, so we can use the scale in this way. This is the diagrams of these 3 elements: the perimeter, the communication, and the courtyards. One of the courtyards, some other courtyards, the structure of these walls, which makes the big spans possible. And finally, the big projects. Maybe we won't be able to make it on time, so I will try to make it a bit shorter. So let's skip to some other ones. So I wanted to show you, we have 10 minutes more. So I will skip these 2 campus projects for Pula and for Zagreb. And I will show you the more current work. This is the one again for Zadar. It was the market place for Zadar. And why doesn't it work? Some error appeared. So is someone going to? I don't know what happened. Just a moment, please. Let me see. Over here. Okay, let's try again. I hope you can see it. If something is wrong, Giovanni, please call me on the phone so I can adapt. I hope it's okay. So we call it the field of possibilities. As you can see, we designed the market as a sequence of, as a rows of columns and beams atop of it. As you know that there are a lot of Roman history in the city of Zadar, or Zara, if you want. There's also a trace of rationalist fascist architecture in the period in Zadar as well. So we wanted, with this sort of, let's say, neo-rationalist approach, we wanted to address all these issues, and we also wanted to address time. That after some years, there will only be these columns and beams, which the people won't be able to recognize when they were made or for what purpose they were made. So this is the idea of having a, I would say, a very autonomous structure. And we studied all the formats of the squares in Zadar, starting from the big one with the St. Donat's Church, in some others, smaller ones, and this is the format of our marketplace, which already exists on this place, next to the city gate. This is a big fortification wall as a kind of a medieval structure around the city. So we did this. This is a kind of a model for an exposed market and for internal market. So we try to see, as you can see, the columns are also escaping a kind of a regularity. So this is the idea of having these stripes and some emphasis within these stripes. Let me go again into this, with some programs that would make it a bit less homogeneous. This is the idea. You can see it also in this image. And we wanted to say no to this fixed roof, which a lot of competitors did. We won this competition. And we want to make a kind of a fluent structure which permits a lot of moving around it. And I wanted to show you some references. This is a part of our competition booklet, citing Sol Levitt, Paul Klee, Giacometti, Donald Judd, Stonehenge, Sol Levitt again, Terragni, Donald Judd, and so on and so on. Some more references, even Plechnik one, which I remembered, Cordoba, and so on. A lot of and Terragni again. A lot of influences. I think for the students, maybe it's interesting to see how the projects come to your on the paper or into the computer by knowing. So the idea, I would stress the word know. So you should equip yourself with knowledge, and then it comes out in a certain point. So these are the references. This is the project. These are some influences from South America. And this is the idea of the roof that goes, the textile roof within these lines of columns, the concrete ones. And by the motors, by engines, you can do this, right? So these are some probes on the model. Again, this idea of three focal points. The idea of walking within these mighty 80 by 80 concrete columns. The idea of not having the closed house, but a kind of a permeable structure. So this is more articulated model of the big house and the very green market as it should be. How we recreate the existing going to the this fortified perimeter with a new staircase, how we, as I said already, adjust the certain border conditions for our projects, how we deal with this borderline by making it, instead of this, making it like this and making this new staircase. This was not a part of the competition, but we felt we have to deal with that again. And this is the very market itself with these lines. We are in the course of elaboration of the project. There is a pretty well-known designer firm called Newman for Use, who designed the benches and all the furniture for this project. These are some festivities that can be organized here when the market is not working. Some ideas of the lighting concepts, when the canopies, when the textile is completely just on the beams, right, in the cylinders. The idea that this remains as if it were made in the 9th century. In the 21st century, make this textile roof. And in the 23rd century, there might be something completely different being again placed on this, let's call it common denominator that progresses from the 9th century towards the future. So this is a kind of an idea. And these are the columns. These are the insides of the columns, like the body with organs, with these heating elements that go like this, that cantilever. You take them like this, with the sprinklers for the summer cooling, the drainage of the roof, the water, the electricity, and so on, different functions that should be all packed into this column. So this is a kind of a engineering challenge to make it within the column and to use these prefab columns on the site. Some sort of urban Camillo-Sitte-like situation. This inclination is repeated here and so on. This is actually this part here. And we wanted to use the same roof on this building, which was heavily criticized. I still don't know why, because I think it's nice to have the same roof on the 3rd floor again. And this was an enquete part of the competition. So we are going to build just this one for the first stage. Okay. Another project from a year ago is a big kindergarten in the outskirts of Zagreb, a structure that we played very many times with this idea of the central corridor and the units left and right, and with some common functions. The idea of a big double-pitched roof, like a mother that protects her children beyond her wings, something like this. This was the idea of because it's a rural setting and we wanted to use this vocabulary of this mighty protective roof towards this little chicken. And this is the idea of having this structure related to this, let's say, semi-city-like, semi-rural setting, by having a strong structure that unifies the whole setting, with entrances, with multi-purpose hall, with some installation units and things like this on the roof, with different articulations of the roof. I will talk about it just now. So this is the structure, and this is the pergola part, this canopy. The entrance into the kindergarten, the structure, how it lands on the side and the roof, like 3 elements. Some more images. This is the plan with these central parts, with the entrances from the north, and every unit has its covered part and uncovered part and the closed part. So the roof has different articulations, as you can see. Some sections, some internal things, the multi-purpose room, some more sections, one of the units. And this is important part, that within this repeating structure, you can elevate to make higher volumes, you can leave it open, you can glaze it, you can cut it out, or you can cover it with some metal. So these are the interpretations of the very same roof according to the needs which happen below it. So the final image of the project. 2 more to go, 3 more to go. Okay, I hope it's okay to extend a bit. We made 2 swimming facilities. This is the one that we almost won in the part of in the workers part of Zagreb, where there are a lot of commercial centers like Lidl, Kaufland, Spar, Interspar, things like that. So we said we'll add something like that to this already existing landscape of these facilities in this part of the city. And we'll make this Kaufland or Lidl very banal roof, and we'll put the swimming pool inside these pits. This was the idea. So this is the roof, this is the ramp going into this pit. And as you can see, the site is less than necessary, right? So this is the idea of having this ramp as a public thing with a lot of events. And then you have the pool, and then you have the roof. This is the idea. You can see the ramp, the pool, the auxiliary things. The roof is made out of inflatable fabric, which mimics the idea of this little banal building. This is the ramp that takes you down, and you see the swimming pool already. So the idea that you can do this roof now, and in 10 years' time, someone else can design the roof, or 20 years' time, someone else can design the roof. This is what we call infrastructure remains the same, but the shape changes according to the very needs or the fashion, right? So we think this is the fashion of our time with this sort of, you should only have this title little here, right? Which gives this idea of this, I would say, known cultural landscape in this city of Zagreb, in this part of Zagreb. So in the sections, you see this idea, how it was made. It is, we studied it compared to the standard construction, and that the price is better. So we somehow took this because this roof is easy to be done. See it here. The internal part, the pool area, very, I would say, simple, straightforward planning with this ramp going up, or a platform. if you want. This is the inside of the pool and the very installed perimeter again, because you cannot put any installations on this inflatable roof. So we have to prove, we thought we have to prove that all the installations, the lighting, the heating, the cooling, the ventilation, sprinklers, all should be somehow in the perimeter, that the roof is completely autonomous, right? This was the idea. And this is this upper part with the stands and different events that you can perform in this sloping site. So this is this public part of the program that we give to the city. We call the project the social pool. These are some details how we would really construct it to make sure that it's not a kind of an idea, that it's a real project that has its own validity. Okay, and then the one that we won this was the east part of the city. This is the west part. On this existing go-kart track, the city made this lot, which is even smaller than the previous one. And actually the lot is big as the house. So actually this funny shape of the lot defines the building of the house. So we had to deal with that. And obviously we did it better than the other ones because we won the competition. So this is the idea of having these different roofs and a connection bridge to this part of the city, because you cannot pass it here because it's a heavily traffic street. So we designed the bridge here, which was also in a kind of a environmental plan. So we somehow interpreted it as a house with the bridge. So this is the project with these different roofs, with a billboard facing the street, with a roof, with a bridge incorporated into the fabric of the building. Again, the idea of, we had to cut the light wells out of this building because the perimeter was fixed and we couldn't do anything else. It looks maybe to you that we always do the same, but in this particular case, we had to deal with that, to cut it within this perimeter, which was already designated to us. So the roof, the ceiling, these are the implants that I will talk about it just now, the circulation and the water itself. Okay, we call it the bathhouse more than the swimming pool. We have this, we are now designing this square as again, the entrance, you enter through this procedure and you have these 2 pools and you have 10 of these blue boxes. We call them spa spots, right? So this is the entrance part with the bridge, with the billboard, which actually serves as a staircase for this facility here, for the tube, right? These are the ceilings of the building, as you can see them here, made of fabric. There are some sections. So as you see, it's a very compact plan. This is the upper floor plan, some interior, some more sections, a view without the bridge. We will also offer this because we wanted to show it as they actually expected it to have. You have this ceiling, which will be, you see the billboard, how it functions within this spiral tube for swimmers. This is the ground floor, very simple one. These are the spa spots. This is a kind of a typological development of the plan. We say within this structure, we'll make these blue spots like kind of a experience space with different temperatures, water facilities, and things like that, to make the bathing as a kind of a unique experience, not only for the grown-ups, but for the children as well. And we wanted also to continue the legacy of bathhouses, let's say from the Budapest, by applying some contemporary Croatian art to this fabric, which will be suspended from the ceiling. So this is the idea of introducing this level of art within the building. So this is this kind of a steamy, somewhat mysterious environment that we want to create here. And the final project is a tiny one, but we are happy because we won it. We won it 3 weeks ago. And it's a kind of a small medical facility. This is where my doctor is, so I keep going to this house all the time. Like the last week where I stepped on the rusty nail on the building site, so I had to go for tetanus. So I came into this house, and it was very funny that they made a competition for this tiny project. So what we did is actually said, we'll keep the house as it is, and we'll add some things to that. So this is the project. So this is the big house with the whole program. We'll cut out this part. We'll make a public space, and then we will go down into the garden. So this is, we call it Villa A, Villa Ambulanta, because the program said, make it as much as the villas, well, villas, we call it villas, or villas, in the outskirts, make it as residential as you can, right? So this was, and we also wanted to mimic the scale of this existing building. So we kept the existing one, we added this one, we added public space with a staircase which leads you into the garden. So this is the idea of keeping the old structure and adding the new one, and this is the project. Very simple one. This is the public staircase that goes through the house. And for the students, it's also very important maybe to study the projects that allow people to go through the house without necessarily entering it. Take, for example, James Sterling's museum in Stuttgart. It's this kind of example. So this is the view from the garden with this staircase. And these are the facilities, the dentists and some other facilities, gynecology, pediatrics, general medical treatments and things like that. So this is this public garden that we created with 2 entrances, with this step going down. Doesn't want to go on. I don't know what happened. Sorry. Something happened. The program crashed. We have a few more slides to see. I don't know what is that. Sorry about that. I have to go on a bit. Maybe here. Okay, so this is just going down. Doesn't function. Okay, you see this one from the garden. The entrance part. The view from the street with this tiny public space, as again, appropriated in scale to the very needs of the house. The section. And we also added a kind of a Maggie space for the special oncological women patients, which is a kind of an extra program which we proposed in the Saturdays or Sunday. It can also work as this Maggie space. You can Google it. It's made mostly in Britain, this Maggie Centers, and we wanted to continue on that. This is this extra space that we have in the ground floor related to the garden, where these oncological patients can have their gatherings and things like that. Okay, and the final one, I wanted to show you, give you a little preview where I was the whole morning, where I ruined my leg with a rusty nail. It's my own house that I'm building now, and Giovanni doesn't know this image also, so I also am showing to him and to all of you. Actually, the building that was mostly influenced by visiting the famous Eames House in Southern Palisades in LA, which has these 2 houses, the one for the studio and one for the family, and with an atrium in between. It was a kind of a influence, where I said, I'll make the house for my son and I'll make the house for me, and we'll eventually meet in this space in between. Another influence, I was really amazed by visiting this space. It's in Charlottesville in Virginia, the first campus ever built by an architect and US President, Thomas Jefferson. This is a really incredible space. So have a look at that. And if you have a chance to visit, I think it's a unique experience. It's 200 years old. And this is this image of the house. This is the state of the works on the site from yesterday. We are now doing with these earthworks to make the site ready. This is my son's house. This is the atrium. And this is my house here, a very simple structure with a pergola and with master bedrooms on the upper floor. So this is more or less what I wanted to show you. If you want to know more, you can visit our website. It's not really very much up to date, but we'll catch up, I promise. So thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any questions now, we have 15 minutes for that. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Hrvoje. You was very clear as always. And I don't want to take time to the student questions, just point out one thing that I learned from your lecture. The thing is that look always beyond the limit of the site, but also of our discipline. So I will give the mic to the students for the questions.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Wake Su, I think, wants to put a question.
Mm-hmm. I don't hear
Hello.
it.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, okay.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Njiric, thank you very much for your lecture. It's very interesting. And I want to ask for the first question. As we all know, your projects and based on the city and the society you lived and worked in very greatly. So I'm very curious that Croatia went through a critical time of homeland war ending in 1995, leaving a country and society greatly damaged. Mm-hmm. So in an interview you did before, you said you left Graz for Zagreb after the war. So how did you involve your architecture ideas during this time? And is that something related to the topic of this affordable utopias you made for this lecture? How is that idea influenced by that experience during your time in Zagreb? Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ju, for the nice question. I appreciate that you have studied a little of my biography. So it's true what you are saying, that after returning from Graz, we had the idea that we will return to contribute to rebuilding of a society and the country and everything, that this new spirit of a new independent state of Croatia coming out of Yugoslavia would be a chance for architects to participate. But this was more like a kind of our impression, which didn't prove to be true, really. We are still lacking more structures, political and professional ones, that could be guided towards, let's see, at least like social housing and things like that. So this is not so well structured. There was a good climate in the beginning of year 2000. A lot of young offices opened and participated in these competitions for social housing, but this all ended with a change of governments in the end of 2000. So from 2010, it was again a very bad situation. So we have to work where we can. As you have seen, we do a lot of public competitions because we think that architects' duty is to participate in the public domain. But in the same time, I must tell you, we do the private commissions as well, because it's a question of survival. But maybe as a little support for you as students, I think that we shouldn't ever complain where are we coming from. You see nice architecture coming from the poorest country, from India. Chile was also not so wealthy until recently. From all over the world. Even Le Corbusier made the houses in India and Bangladesh, or Louis Kahn, with very simple means. So my final comment on your question would be, don't take excuse of being from a poor country. It's only a poverty of mind that can prevent you from making decent and good architecture, you know? So I think that it all happens in our heads. It's an intellectual job. It's not about design, it's about strategies for the society and everyone else, of course. But nothing should prevent you from dreaming big, from being ambitious, from being articulated. And you should, of course, adjust your means to the very situation that you are building in or proposing your project for. So generally speaking, it's only up to us and our imagination to make nice architecture. It really is not important that you live in a country like Switzerland or US to make something flashy. It's more like media presentation that want us to believe that the best architecture comes from those countries because the media coverage is better than from Bangladesh, for example, right? But it's not true. Don't be misguided by that. I hope you get this message.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, and for your advice too.
You're welcome.
Two of my colleagues are now in the class, and one of them is back in China. It's very difficult to put on a Mac connection, so I'm going to ask for the.
Sorry about that. Yeah,
I'm going to ask the questions for them.
Okay.
The second one is, as we saw on your studio's website, visionary projects are the essential part of your practice. Based on facts and defined by circumstances, various concepts of an utopian character are developed in order to question the constraints of the current production in architecture. So based on this, can you explain in detail what are the different non-utopian concepts and how do you specifically question the constraints of the current production?
Okay, thank you for this one as well. I think it's also very important to make a very clear distinction between utopian visionary projects and the one that you do for your everyday living. For example, if you have a task of designing the main national stadium that wasn't built in Croatia for very many years, then you have every right to think big and to be visionary, to be utopian, to be ambitious. But if you make social housing, then you should address some other means, you know. So first of all, you have to make sure for yourself whether, or let's call it iconic architecture, iconic building. You heard about that. The websites and the blogs are full of iconic buildings. Most of them coming from China now, because Chinese want to have this sort of flashy architecture. But I'm happy that there are some more sober or more articulate architecture coming from the Chinese themselves. So I'm very happy about that. But as I said, it's very important to decide for yourself whether this site needs an icon or not. I would say in the most of the cases, you don't really need it, you know? So the chance to be visionary, to be grand scale, to be utopian is very rare. You can be utopian in terms of proposing certain aspects for the better welfare of a society, in making social aspects. For example, now we are doing a competition for a relatively big settlement with 1,000 apartments for the city of Split, where we are putting the emphasis on the social space. But the house, it should remain as simple as possible. Double pitched roof, covered with some ceramic materials, with very small scale structures. The emphasis is on this common space in between, on these gardens, on these courtyards and things like that. So I would generally say it's very rare to be able to make it utopian and iconic. And this is why we use this term of affordable utopias, utopias that are little dreams that you can make really affordable within the society that you are working in. And Croatia is definitely this kind of society, a very, I would say, small scale, a very poor society, and in terms of finances and political governments. So we as architects can only make these little steps and not trying to be out of the scale and out of the context. So you should really estimate for yourself what is the context like, what are the real answers that you can offer.
Pardon? Excuse me, can you repeat it again?
The last sentence. So you should really try to be contextual, to see what your context tells you, right?
Okay.
It really needs this sort of a grand gesture, or if you can work with little humble steps, but also decisive in terms of making nice environments.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Third question. You are from Croatia, and what do you think are the main differences in architecture style between Croatia and Austria, which you have stayed at, and Italy?
Okay. I think there are very big differences from the countries that you are mentioning. So I have some experience from the previous years from Italy, and I see everything coming on these websites. So I'm afraid at least what has been shown has less to do with structural thinking and more to do with design. I think when you are studying and living in Italy, you cannot escape of being stylistic or formal, but it doesn't prevent you to think in other terms. So maybe I'm not in the last time, maybe I'm not so familiar with what's really happening in Italy. Let's call it behind the closed doors of the studios. And I see the work, for example, done by Cino Zucchi. There are some of his small-scale housing structures which are nice. There is some nice thinking about a guy called Stefano Mirti, who is also dealing in housing, also a kind of a former Europan fellow. There are two Italians united under the name SOX. They have a fantastic website, and they, I think, are good architects. They are practicing in Paris. There are a number of these practices that are working with this small scale, which is not so formal, even though Cino Zucchi has also the projects where he's very formal and very interested in the appearance of the project. But you should maybe look for these small studios who are really doing the substantial works. Visit this, for example, this SOX studio website, and you will see a variety of approaches based on knowledge, based on history, based on legacy, which can give you a good platform to start from. Switzerland is a completely another world. It has less to do with quality of living and society. It has more to do with the form and the perfection of execution. So I think that you shouldn't be so attracted to that one. It's good for the Swiss, within the Swiss limits, but not necessarily to be, you know, this commercial which says, don't try this at home. Don't try to be Oljati back in China, right? Try to be Chinese in China, you know? And so I think that it's very, very dangerous to be too impressed by this work. I admire the work by Oljati and people like that. But in the same time, it's not something that you can easily copy and translate into any kind of society. Austria is a special situation. If you mention some of our neighboring countries or the environments where I was participating in design and education, it has a very, I would say, a strong tradition related to the regions. The West tends to be very Swiss. Vienna tends to be very traditional. Graz tends to be very imaginative based on the so-called Grazer Schule, which was actually in the 80s. So Austria is like a kind of a melting pot of different strategies to make architecture working. And it's also gives you a variety of possibilities to look at. But in the same time, as I said, it's more important, and Giovanni actually also supported me. It's more important to look in the history and look in some other disciplines, not just the current architecture that happens in architectural blocks. So this is how I behave. I study them every day, a lot of them, but for you as well as for us as older ones, it's important to have a critical distance to that, to have your own, by looking at all these examples, you should somehow try to establish your own point of view where you can defend your view with arguments, right? I think this is important.
Thank you very much. It's very helpful to us.
I hope.
And I finished all my questions now.
Okay, thank you very much for your questions. Do we have some more?
So if there is anybody else, is your turn now. Otherwise, I think there are 2:30. So...
May I?
Oh yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hello. I am a colleague of Giovanni in the School of Architecture in Turin.
Okay, great to get to know you.
I always appreciate your work from several years, and I really appreciate your presentation. Thank you very much. Finally, sometimes we listen something about architecture. It's not a joke. It's a really my point of view. I just want to the fact that I share and I agree with you with your attitude to find a simple solution. Be careful, carefully to the context, to the real condition that you are starting from, that are local, historical, and they are very complex attitude, but very clear, very simple. And I share also what you say about the drawings. When you suggest to the student to use simple drawings, architectural drawings, I mean,
I appreciate that.
We use it. I really appreciate this fact, because our students are always more this problem to looking for charming draws, but not really useful draws. What I want to ask you is, what don't you think, considering these two questions, these two positions, that, for example, the actual interesting and due towards the BIM, towards the idea to codify architecture, I mean, in every kind of normatives, process and building, etc., and to get gate to the design process will be kill this kind of centrality or the peculiarity of architecture and design. Because in this case, I think only great company will survive, only people that can manage this complexity made by number, made by euro, made by money, etc. So I want you to understand your position about that, because I think that you are one of the best people that can give that position about that.
Okay, thank you very much for your question. I didn't hear your name. Could you repeat it, please?
Sorry?
What is your name?
Massimo Crotti.
Okay, nice to get to know you, Massimo. Hope to meet you in person one day. So thank you very much for the question. I think it's a very good and very, I would say, typical question from our, let's say, very concerned generation who observed the young guys doing these sort of computer things, right? So I agree completely with you. BIM is something that threatens our profession, but it's inevitable. I don't know how is it in Italian law, but in Croatia, the necessity and obligation to develop the public projects in BIM will step I think next year to become part of the law. So if you do this, let's say, swimming pool, you have to deliver it in BIM because they want to have the complete supervision over the project. So this is our inevitable future that we are facing. And you are completely right that the stronger will survive, the smaller will disappear. And I'm happy that I have the office where the people are young and well educated in these programs. But in the same time, a message for the students would be design with hand. I have a big battle in my office with my young colleagues, because they start, when they tell them do this, they start by using the mouse, and you should start with a pencil. It's not going to be changed. And maybe for your students hearing me now think, well, wow, look at another old-fashioned old guy telling us nonsense. Nowadays we have computers, we can do whatever, but you won't design a building with a mouse. You have to start first, you have to do a mental process in your head, then you have to put it on the paper, at least as a sketch or a strategy, and then you can go into the computer. And everything else, and I've never seen anyone design a project in a computer that has any sort of validity in terms of general quality. So computer is inevitable, but you cannot start and you can't expect the computer to solve the problems for you. I hope it is an answer of what you wanted me to comment on.
No,
Okay.
thank you very much. I totally agree with you, and I think that we are not, of course, close to this condition, but I think that will be selected in a very dangerous way our practice.
Yes, yes, I agree completely with you. Thank you very much for bringing this question forward.
Thank you.
So, I don't know if there are other questions. Maybe I'm looking at the chat in order to understand if something is coming.
Ah, there is something. Very interesting talk. Thank you. Okay. Just saying, thank you very much for the comment.
Okay, so I take the opportunity to say ciao to Hrvoje and say grazie. Thank you very much. It was very interesting, as always. You are still young, not an old-fashioned pencil lover, but a young architect, or at least younger than me, so very young. So thank you very much. I think that this lecture will be available for the people because it was recorded. So I will suggest to my student and other people to check it out next days. Okay. So Hrvoje, it's always a pleasure to see you, and maybe let's talk a little bit again. Maybe.
Okay, thank you very much. Allow me to say some words at the end. So, yes. Cari amici italiani, sono molto felice di avere questa possibilità di parlare con voi oggi. Sono molto triste per tutto che succede in Italia al momento. Spero che sarà meglio negli giorni prossimi. Spero anche che possiamo incontrare da vivo, in senso fisico, nel poco tempo, e discutere vivo e vedere le facce e le gestioni è più facile da parlare su ogni soggetto, è veramente anche abbastanza con l'architettura. Allora spero che questo giorno venirà molto presto. Era molto interessante anche rispondere alle vostre domande. Vi auguro buon lavoro in questo modo molto artificiale, però possibile. Grazie per mandarmi questa possibilità da mostrare il mio lavoro. Ci vediamo.
Grazie Hrvoje. La prossima volta a Torino, allora.
Grazie, ciao a tutti. Ciao.
Grazie all'architetto Njiric. Thanks so much.
Ciao Massimo.
Yeah. We'll see you next Wednesday.
Grazie
everybody
a tutti. Ciao.
Scuola di Valparaiso. School of Valparaiso next Wednesday. Sorry.